Rare conditions affect up to 5 in 10,000 people. They can be chronic and life-threatening and take longer to diagnose and treat than more common conditions. In this programme by the Genetic Alliance UK and ITN Productions, we'll be shining a light on rare conditions, exploring the advances in diagnostic technologies, new treatments, and raising awareness of the conditions that can get overlooked. The government has released plans for the UK Rare Disease Framework. This covers awareness, coordination of care and access to therapies. Now, the government's Rare Diseases Framework has laid out challenges faced by those living with rare conditions and how they should be addressed. To explain more, I'm joined now by the Genetic Alliance UK's Director of Policy, Nick Mead. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. Talk to me about the main priorities surrounding rare conditions.
Well, the priorities of our community match up really well with the UK Rare Diseases Framework. The 4 priorities you mentioned of diagnosis, awareness of rare conditions amongst healthcare professionals, coordination of care and access to therapies all match up with what we're looking for. We've chosen to focus raising awareness on diagnosis because that's such a crucial part of the rare disease journey for everyone living with a rare condition.
Well, Nick, you mentioned diagnosis there. The Genetic Alliance UK have been looking into what a good diagnosis is. What are the key findings?
First of all, the framework wants to focus on an accurate and rapid diagnosis, and that's crucially important. We don't want to get away from that. But we also want to look at the experience of a diagnosis. This isn't something like a quick blood test at the GPs that can happen really quickly. Some diagnostic journeys take years. And so we need to think about the experience of people having that diagnosis and going through that diagnostic journey. So our recommendations include a central source of information for healthcare professionals to be able to supply information at the point of diagnosis, but also a plan for the diagnostic journey so that while a patient's going through that process, they know what care they can access, and they'll have that care coordinated for them. And finally, we want to produce a charter of the rights that patients can have around their diagnosis.
I mean, it's not just about the awareness, as you pointed out there. It's actually about that patient's journey and putting the patient at the heart of all of this.
Absolutely. We have to remember that as it takes so long, your life is carrying on around this, and people have relatives. 70% of rare conditions are genetic, so the rest of your family could be thinking about what's going on with your diagnosis. We could be thinking about whether we want to have more children or not, and the diagnosis might reflect upon that. And then, crucially, there's treatment. And if we can't get a quick diagnosis for some conditions, then we miss out on the opportunity of treatment. So for every rare condition, there's a different story about why that diagnosis is so important.
And Nick, are more and more rare diseases being discovered all the time?
Yes, so in the UK, we're leading the world in genomic diagnoses. And while we use that as a diagnostic tool to find the conditions we already know about, we're also using the tool to understand conditions that previously haven't been recognized by medicine. And that means some of the families that have been stuck in a diagnostic odyssey for 8, 10, 15 years or so are finally getting the genetic code for what's caused their problem. So for us, it's crucially important that journey doesn't end with a bunch of letters or code in the post. It needs to continue with research, with information, so that they can get all the things that most of us would expect you get with a diagnosis, including a prognosis and information about the future.
And so genetic sequencing plays kind of like a crucial key role here, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the main tool we'll be using to make those diagnoses, but also understand the how the genome is working and understand where some of the less understood rare conditions are having their effects. We're also looking in the UK now at using genome sequencing as a newborn screening tool, which could have a lot of power to rapidly increase diagnoses at birth as well.
I mean, at this time in the world, we've got very limited resources, haven't we? It's quite important to make sure that, rare diseases, that things like this aren't overlooked.
Yeah, and I think over the past 2 years or so, the experience of someone living with a rare condition might be better understood. I think after the pandemic, the public will have a better understanding of what it's like to live with a condition that you don't understand, you don't know what the future holds, and a condition can affect your life in ways that you hadn't previously understood. So as the NHS faces a lot of pressures around recovering from COVID, we really want to see rare diseases included in that recovery plan.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Spinal muscular atrophy is a very rare genetic disorder affecting motor neurons in the spinal cord. In this special report for the Genetic Alliance UK, we hear firsthand from the mother of 5-year-old Ezra, who is living with SMA, and find out why newborn screening is key to crucial early diagnosis.
Look, it's you.
It's me? Well, I look just beautiful. What about the fringe? Yeah, Mum. Good job, Ez. Mum. Ezra is a typical 5-year-old boy. He loves dinosaurs, volcanoes, space, loves reading books. He's great.
Ezra's also got spinal muscular atrophy type 1, the severest form of a rare, genetically inherited muscle-wasting condition. Ezra struggles with many of the things most people take completely for granted: breathing, eating, even holding up the weight of his own body. But he's one of the first generation of SMA type 1 kids to make it beyond infancy.
At that time, so he was born 2016, his diagnosis came March 2017, and there wasn't any treatment in the UK. And so all we were reading, and what his neurologist said to us, was he will die before he's 2, but he's a very severe case, so he will probably die before he is 1.
Remarkably, Portia and Ezra's doctors got access to an experimental drug from America called Spinraza. It saved his life, but it's likely Ezra will always need intensive care.
But once the neurons have died, they don't come back. So he will still need his BiPAP ventilator at night time. He'll still need to be peg-fed. He'll still need nurses here overnight with him, watching him. He'll still need his SATs monitored. Every time he gets a cold, we still need to be extra careful.
Ezra and Portia's lives are a daily march of machines. Next to his bed here, we have a ventilator because his muscles aren't strong enough for him to breathe properly. And because of that, he also can't cough to clear the mucus from his lungs. So he has a cough assist machine and then a suction machine to get that mucus out. Then here we have an oxygen and heart rate monitor. There are various orthotics to help straighten out his limbs, and because he can't swallow properly, he also needs to have all of his nutrition from a bottle that is pumped straight into his stomach. And the astounding thing is that these days, Ezra's condition, and therefore the necessity for all of this stuff, is entirely preventable.
A simple heel pinprick test done at birth can reveal which kids have SMA. Then they can get medication before irreversible motor neuron damage has been done. 6 European countries already do this, but the UK isn't yet one of them.
Screening is the best investment you can do as a society.
Leading neuromuscular scientist Laurent Sauvé says it doesn't just make compassionate and medical sense, it makes financial sense too.
The cost of the screening is about, let's say, £3 to £4 per baby. It means that if you need to screen 10,000 baby to get a single one that you identify. So identifying a patient before the symptoms rather than after the symptoms cost about £30,000, right? But a life in the wheelchair, a full life in the wheelchair, with all compensation, with the fact that one of the parents will probably not be able to work with the non-invasive ventilation, has been estimated to be between 5 and 7 millions of pounds. So it means that if you invest 30 to 40,000 pounds into the screening for identifying the patients, then you can save down the line 5 to 7 millions. If you're aware of a better investment, just tell me, I'll give you my money to invest.
Portia needs no convincing.
It's absolutely crazy that we don't have newborn screening in the UK. If we can find kids like Ezra when they're just born and we can get this drug into them, our lives would be completely different if that was happening when Ezra was born.
Do you think about that at all?
Yeah, I think about it a lot. Yeah, it seems very unfair.
But in the main, Portia and her family have accepted things as they are, the new normal, as she puts it, and they love their Ezra.
And he's very smart. He's really smart. Like, he knows everything about the human body and stuff. He's a really sweet brother. Although, like all brothers, he can be a bit annoying.
Ezra is living his life to the full, but it's also a life full of physical dangers and limitations. In the UK, a child is born with SMA every 5 days. Until newborn screening is widespread, many of them will face the same challenges as Ezra. It doesn't have to be this way.
One in around 50,000 children worldwide are affected by PFIC, a rare inherited liver disease which causes severe itching. And the impacts on families can be devastating.
For children like these living with progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, quality of life is diminished and life expectancy is significantly reduced. PFIC has the highest incidence of liver cancer of all liver diseases. But in daily life, it's the pruritus, uncontrollable itching, that causes most distress.
The kind of itch that Eleanor experienced was from the inside out. So it was a bit like, the way I used to think of it was her internal organs were itching and she couldn't get to them. And her blood was itching, but she couldn't get to it. This was something that started usually in the evening and lasted all night. She would scratch herself till she bled. Sleep deprivation is a form of torture, and it was torturous.
PFIC is caused by genetic abnormalities in the formation and transport of bile, a fluid that drains from the liver into the intestines, removing waste products from the body. In PFIC children, bile acids accumulate in the liver and can spill into the blood, causing liver damage and the severe itching. Biopharmaceutical company Albireo is one of a number of companies investing heavily in research to address rare liver diseases like PFIC. Professor Richard Thompson was a PhD student when he discovered the main gene for PFIC. He says research into new treatments is key as clinicians seek to prevent disease progression to liver cirrhosis or cancer and to reduce the need for liver transplants.
This group of conditions that really have a retention of these bile salts in the liver because they're not being excreted normally into bile and getting to the intestines in the normal manner. And the accumulation of those bile acids in the liver causes damage to the liver and causes a whole series of other chemical effects which result in the other extrahepatic, so symptoms in the rest of the body. And we've gone to all sorts of lengths to try and improve the symptoms of these patients. But to cut a long story short, many of those patients have ended up having liver transplants, specifically because the quality of life and the itch is so bad. And to put a child through a major surgery like that, actually putting their life at risk as a consequence because of a symptom like itch, will probably sound extraordinary to most people, But that is the nature of what we're talking about. It's sufficiently bad that families readily did that to try and cure the problem. It's really a failure of our armamentarium that we've resorted to something as extreme as that. Based on the surgical data, it looks like if you can really change the biochemistry, change the natural history of the disease, all these other complications are avoided as well.
Alison Taylor of the Children's Liver Disease Foundation says that reducing the trauma caused by PFIC is a major aim of research. PFIC patients suffer greatly from sleep deprivation, pruritus, and travelling to specialist centres, plus the long-term risks of liver transplants.
It's been really heartbreaking sometimes to hear of the personal stories and see the pictures of children that have been so severely affected. Pruritus is one of the most devastating impacts of the condition. It has a huge effect for them. It can affect their sleep. It affects the mother's sleep, the father's sleep, and the wider family's sleep. And that has knock-on effects to their everyday life and their ability to concentrate, to be able to give themselves fully at school. It can be really, really debilitating and can be something that affects all sorts of normal aspects of a normal life and make things incredibly difficult. In the past, it's meant that children do have some treatment options. Those are the use of off-label drugs that don't always work or don't always work consistently. There has been some surgical interventions which include a stoma bag and having a stoma bag with bile draining, which, as you can imagine with young children, is difficult. And then, of course, there's the potential that people have to go onto the transplant list.
With new research from companies committed to finding solutions for PFIC, families may one day find relief from the devastating impacts of this rare disease.
Hereditary angioedema, or HAE, is a chronic rare genetic disorder which can be life-threatening. Being rare, HAE can be misdiagnosed by doctors not seeing the condition frequently. BioCryst Pharmaceuticals work closely with patient advocacy groups and healthcare workers to actively improve outcomes.
Unexplained swellings, excruciating pain, and days spent vomiting or in bed. These can be the symptoms of a condition called hereditary angioedema, a chronic rare genetic disorder. It can affect the face, genitals, and abdomen. Throat or facial swellings can be life-threatening if the airways become blocked.
Globally, HAE affects between 1 and 10,000 and 1 and 50,000 people. It's so rare that misdiagnosis can easily happen.
When I was 15, I had a stomach swelling and my dad took me to hospital, and a male doctor decided that he would have to do an internal because I was actually having a miscarriage. Had to then try and explain to him at the age of 15, when my father stood next to me, that I wasn't having a miscarriage because I hadn't had sex.
Nikki Bowen is one of around 1,500 people in the UK with HAE, but patient groups think there are more, as it may go unrecognised for years.
I personally believe there's more that haven't been diagnosed, because getting a diagnosis is very difficult. As obviously you know, it can mimic other illnesses, allergies, appendicitis, which my daughter had an operation for appendicitis and it wasn't that. So we are trying to, at the moment, we're concentrating on awareness.
HAE is a defect in the gene that controls a blood protein called C1 inhibitor. Treatments for HAE have now improved, with emphasis shifting from managing attacks to preventing attacks, though patients still face a lack of knowledge when they need emergency treatment.
It takes 10 years before they might see one HAE patient. Because it's a rare disease, we've had circumstances when our patients carry their medication with a letter explaining exactly what the disease is and what medication they should use. And they've gone to an accident emergency department where instead of administering the medication immediately, the healthcare professionals there have taken a long time to try to fathom what actually it means. And that's because of poor education. And it's inevitable because it is a rare disease.
Nikki was diagnosed early and has a good relationship with her doctor. there's a push to give patients more control of their own care and treatments through shared decision-making.
The medication you're taking now might not be appropriate for the next 20, 30, 40 years. You might want to have children, you might want to have a different career path. Certain career paths will do medicals on you and things like that. So you are better to have that open, frank discussion with the physician to see what is your best path for medication.
Pharmaceutical company BioCryst is working alongside advocacy groups and clinicians to understand patients' needs and support shared decision-making in all healthcare settings.
For us to truly understand how the disease manifests itself and how it affects patients on a day-to-day basis helps us develop drugs to help support them to have a normal life, essentially. Many years ago, there was maybe only 1 or 2 treatments. Now there's a number of treatments in HAE. And having that shared decision-making between the patient and the physician is really important.
The job of a healthcare professional is to provide the options available to the patient and help the patient make a decision which is right for them. What the healthcare professional knows is generic. It doesn't apply to individual patients. So that interaction is really important for the patient to educate the doctor what their needs are.
Like Nikki, Anne's daughter Sian has HAE. They can see things are getting better, but big challenges remain ahead, and the ultimate goal for drug development is to normalise patient lives.
One of the consultants said to me, "You've got 2 choices, Mrs. Harding. You and Sian either control the illness or it controls you." So we chose to control it.
So you must feel quite positive about the future now?
Yeah, on the whole, yes, I do. I am quite positive. I mean, we've moved an awful long way in the last 30 years, and I'm hoping it will continue.
Rare diseases do not discriminate. They can impact anyone at any time of life. But one thing is certain, a rare disease diagnosis profoundly changes a patient's life and the lives of those around them. We visited Manchester to learn more from specialist rare disease clinicians about the whole patient journey, the impact on families, and the advances in awareness and treatment options.
The teams that support patients with rare diseases make a huge difference to how they and their families manage that truly unique journey.
Some of our conditions are super rare, so there's hardly any people alive with them, and some conditions we treat here, there are 4 or 5 people in the whole country with the same condition as you. So that is really rare, and you might feel like it's only me and I'm the only one. My job is to promote integration, engagement, and show that having a rare disease doesn't mean you still don't get to have a life.
Although rare diseases are individually rare, collectively they are common. It's actually not that rare to have a rare condition, but what they all have in common is getting a diagnosis, getting access to treatment, and dealing with the impact as a family. Delays in diagnosis can have serious repercussions.
It means you don't get treatment on time. It means that you can develop sort of psychological complications of having your symptoms when no one believes you, and that can be really quite stressful and difficult.
Even with a diagnosis and the support of healthcare professionals, managing it all can wreak havoc on families.
A rare genetic disease, which is unknown, where there's perhaps not good treatments or prognosis about, is devastating. The more destructive the disorder, the worse the psychological adjustment, the more devastating it can be for the family. You know, financially, psychosocially, emotionally, divorce, breakups, mental ill health in brothers and sisters. It's a sledgehammer to families. There are services around, there are support organisations, there are NHS professionals like me who can try to support and help make it that little bit less challenging.
One of the biggest challenges facing rare disease patients is the transition from the gentle world of childhood medicine to adult services.
We spend a lot of time focusing on the transition of our young people to adulthood, and we take several years over that gradual transition from childhood to adulthood, from childhood care under paediatricians like myself to adult care under adult sort of rare disease specialists.
We are now seeing patients that we would have never seen before in adult practice because of the fantastic care that they've had from Simon Jones and colleagues in the paediatric metabolic sector, for example. We try and see the patients initially in a place of great security and safety, i.e. in the paediatric sector, several times. We obviously talk closely to the clinicians and the other specialists so that we know the story of that individual patient and their individual needs so that we can personalise their care when we move them into adult practice.
Mark has seen the outlook for patients with rare diseases improve over the last 20 years.
Physiotherapy, good nutrition, psychological support are all critical still. But specific treatments have emerged increasingly in recent years. And of course, we're right on the cusp of genetic therapies as well moving forward. So it's been a really empowering and important field to work in.
When I started in this career 20 years ago, lots of children we would meet would die pretty quickly. But now there are new opportunities, new research studies, gene therapies on the cusp of the horizon, that there's so much research going on. It feels like there's a little bit of hope we can offer people.
I've always been struck by that important mantra of rare but potentially treatable, and that really is what we want to do. We want patient-focused research to guide our treatments for today and more treatments for tomorrow.
When approving rare disease treatments quickly, it's important to have access to high-quality data and evidence. Costello Medical use innovative methods to capture the expert opinion of patients, their families, and healthcare professionals, helping to reduce the uncertainty associated with potential treatments.
Rare diseases collectively affect millions of people around the world. But because data about them is so scarce, most patients face long and frustrating waits to access life-changing medicines. At Costello Medical, they're providing support to a wide range of stakeholders who could change that. Here, they're using innovation to gather valuable information about rare diseases in a structured way.
We find in rare diseases there's a lot of uncertainty around long-term outcomes, around how this treatment will affect people that aren't typical of that clinical trial, how it will affect caregivers, how patients will feel about that treatment as compared to something else that might be in development. And so we do a number of other supplementary studies that can bring pieces of the puzzle together, ready to bring that to the table for decision-making purposes. And we do a lot of what's called real-world evidence, capturing insights from the community that are most representative of those that will receive the treatment in the real world.
Costello Medical asks the experts, the patients themselves, their families, and healthcare professionals their opinion. That information is gathered on the company's Delphi app. The platform then shows where participants are in agreement or where there's a difference of opinion. The beauty of this app is that it allows you to design, run and analyse multi-round surveys in a single platform, making it easier to gather information from patients, their families and healthcare professionals.
And it helps you get at both quantitative information but also qualitative information, which can be very, very hard to collect in a robust and systematic way. We developed the app to streamline the process, both for our clients who want to conduct more of these Delphi panels, but also the participants on the other end.
Pharmaceutical companies can use methods such as Delphi panels to present supplementary evidence to help determine whether a treatment is likely to be cost-effective in the long term.
What Costello does is really valuable because it's going to be undertaken in a very structured manner with some formal processes. And those are the sorts of things that committees are looking for, to be able to say, actually, this trial or the evidence that was created has been designed in a constructive manner. And what this really means now for patients is that there is an opportunity for those gaps to be bridged and for the committee to be much more confident about those decisions that they're making. And the public, who we're responsible to, will feel confident that those decisions are being made with the right evidence that's been available to us.
Alexa Ursbruch, who works for the pharmaceutical company Roche, is the UK lead for spinal muscular atrophy, a rare neuromuscular condition. She thinks patient voices are vital.
In rare diseases, it's absolutely crucial because a lot of people just don't understand the disease. There's often not great ways of measuring the impact of a treatment. So imagine a parent whose child needs less intense care, is more independent, what that could mean to them. They might be less worried or anxious about the future. They might be able to go back to work and so on. Clinical trials do not assess that. They're focusing on efficacy and safety. So we need other ways of assessing this. It really requires this all hands on deck approach of the different stakeholders working together.
It became very clear to me that in a developed healthcare system, this is the place where we can make the biggest difference. This is where there are children dying before their 5th birthday. This is where there are families who have no diagnosis and are struggling to navigate the healthcare sector for years. This is where innovative treatments can absolutely revolutionise lives. And I think in rare diseases particularly, we have to think creatively about how to get the best evidence and what we can all do to bring that to the table.
Whole genome sequencing has only recently become feasible at scale, but now the technology has matured, the medical community is using it to study and help diagnose some of the most debilitating rare diseases. Genomics England has been leading this research through the sequencing of over 100,000 participants' genomes. We went to find out more.
I have a sight condition called Retinitis Pigmentosa, which is an inherited disease. There's a particular gene affected in my family. It basically means that I started off with no night vision, then peripheral vision started closing in.
When Andy's eyesight started to change when he was a child, nobody knew really what to do about it.
The GP prescribed me vitamin A tablets and it did nothing. Coming from a good Lancashire family, somebody brought in some holy water from Lourdes. That didn't do anything. So I ended up going to the hospital in Manchester.
It didn't stop him from getting a degree or a good job, but all the while, Andy persisted in his search for a definitive diagnosis. And when he had children, there was a worry about whether he could pass a condition on. In 2013, he and his family signed up for a programme called the 100,000 Genomes Project, run by Genomics England. And they got an answer. Not only did it confirm Andy's retinitis pigmentosa, they know his daughter Margaret carries it too, and she could pass it on. Genomics England was set up in 2013 as a government-run company to bring the benefits of genomic medicine to everybody. It starts by using so-called genetic sequencing to help people identify what condition they might have.
So these are the genome sequencing machines that you put the DNA in, and it spends 24, 48 hours reading through the sequence of the genome. The DNA has been cut up into lots of little fragments, and for each of those fragments that's in the machine, it's doing a little readout of that section of the genome. Taking the readout of all of those different bits, you can put it together and work out what the whole 3 billion letter code of the whole genome is, the best readout you can get of it. And then you can work out how you zoom in on the bits that are relevant to that person's problems.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's inspiring. It's changed so much in the last 10 or 15 years, from it being genuinely unimaginable that you could sequence someone's genome to help their healthcare. It was, science. It was almost science fiction that you could do it at all. And suddenly it's something that we can actually sit in clinic and say to families that you can do.
And how does that make you feel?
Lucky. Really lucky that we're alive at this time when there's such progress, and there's lots left to do, but we're at a time where there's enormous progress being made.
Genomics England is arguably where research and healthcare meet. Researchers get the case studies they need to help find the answers they're looking for, And then the NHS can take advantage of this by using the developments from the researchers to help treat their patients.
It's thought to be the first instance of genome sequencing being used as a routine part of healthcare.
Part of the founding principles of the NHS is around equity of access and free at the point of care. And for us, when we talk about bringing the benefits of genomic medicine to everyone, that word everyone is hugely important, and the partnership with the NHS allows that to really come to life. The implications of doing this at scale are huge because we can start to deliver on that vision of a health service which is predictive and preventative rather than coming in and treating sickness. We can get ahead of it. And that means that we can start to understand more and more on the basis of what's in someone's genome, what's likely to go wrong with them, if they're sick, what that is, and which medicines will start to work with them. So we can really help people in England and the UK focus on wellness rather than sickness.
Although a diagnosis in Andy and Margaret's case doesn't mean a cure, there is one thing they now have. That's certainty.
How has this diagnosis affected you in terms of the decisions that you may well make in your life?
It's given me a sort of bigger sense of responsibility. It's not affected whether I want children or not, I still do. It's more so made me think further about how I go about it and what the actual right decisions would be, not for me, but for my future children.
Genomics England are extending their screening from everything from COVID to cancer. They're even exploring the potential for routine testing at birth. And above all, they're listening to people like Andy and his daughter to hear all the different views out there on how this technology can be most useful. And that means even if we may not know all the answers today, as soon as they do come, everybody will be ready.
Genomics is transforming how people with rare conditions are diagnosed. And it's important all healthcare professionals, not just genomics specialists, understand its impact. Health Education England striving towards that goal with their Genomics Education programme, sharing knowledge, skills and experience to best support patients and their families through their rare disease journey.
Georgia was born with Silver-Russell syndrome.
People still think I'm in school or like I'm a 15-year-old, but I'm 24.
This rare genetic condition affects a person's growth rate.
She was just 1.71 kilos when she was born, and that's actually a growth chart.
So nobody should be smaller than that.
Yeah.
And she was way off the chart.
Right there.
Georgia struggled to grow or put on weight throughout her early childhood, but it took several years to fully understand why.
So I have a condition called Russell syndrome, which is a form of dwarfism.
UPD7, maternal uniparental, on chromosome number 7.
Yeah.
It makes such a difference because without a diagnosis, you always think the worst. So once we got the diagnosis, it was almost like, phew, thank goodness for that. Because although she still has the problems that she had, we knew that it shouldn't get any worse. The years should help and things will improve over time.
In recent years, huge advances in genomic technologies have rapidly reduced diagnosis wait times for many genetic conditions.
These faster, cheaper sequencing technologies allow us to read that whole genome in just a few days and at a cost of less than £1,000 per genome. So faster, cheaper sequencing is really enabling that genetic testing to be pushed out and be accessible across healthcare.
But to reap the benefits of those advancements in genomic technologies requires healthcare professionals across the spectrum to have quick and easy access to the information they need. Health Education England's Genomics Education programme has developed a wide range of education for healthcare professionals to form what they call the learning ladder.
What capability does this give clinicians?
If we go into the education page on the website, you'll see that we have bite-sized genomics, which is at the bottom rung of that ladder, and that they're the short courses, through to online courses, talk courses, core concepts. Or you can access the resources through this Genomics and Healthcare tab, which is either aligned to genomics in your profession or genomics in your specialty.
For GP Will Evans, it's about providing healthcare professionals with the resources they need to inform decision making.
So some of these tests, which were only being requested by clinical geneticists not very long ago, are now being requested by different doctors, different healthcare professionals sitting in all sorts of different healthcare settings. Education is crucial for this, but it needs to be very targeted and specific education that's relevant for whatever their current clinical practice. So that is basic genomic literacy, so you kind of know what the terminology means and what the tests mean, but also how that can affect your practice. So who are the patients you would be referring, and what are the specific issues that relate to those conditions? And then really important is recognizing when you need to have more information, and then being easily signposted to additional resources for you and your patients.
Addressing this need for targeted education, the Genomics Education programme is developing a new resource for clinicians called GeneNotes.
This is the resource that people will access at that point of patient care. So we would expect the clinician to land in the clinic page at that point of patient consultation. And you'll see that we've got different specialties here. We might go into oncology, which then shows the various different cards or resources aligned to different clinical scenarios. So they're all written to this template around a scenario. And then these are the hooks for learning that are peppered throughout that Tier 1 resource. So for instance, we could follow this one here into gene panel sequencing. We've now dived into the Tier 2 knowledge hub. We're now extending our learning.
So this isn't a static product, this is something that will evolve.
Absolutely.
A valuable resource for healthcare professionals in helping patients like Georgia receive the care they need.
It's got to be beneficial.
Yeah.
It has. I mean, you can't expect them to be specialists. That's what the specialists are there for. But to be able to at least talk your language and have some understanding of what the condition is and what the needs are has got to be important, yes.
For many people living with rare conditions, the journey to an accurate diagnosis can be long, frustrating and worrisome. HRA Pharma Rare Diseases understands this and are dedicated to raising awareness as well as providing treatment for conditions such as Cushing's disease. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Kate Scoffins, a former Cushing's disease patient, and consultant Professor Mark Gunnell. Thank you both so much for joining me. Kate, to you first. Cushing's disease is extremely rare. It's difficult to diagnose. Even you yourself as a GP weren't able to spot it.
Yeah, I think the symptoms when they begin are very, very vague. Certainly in my case, they built up very slowly over a period of time. So I think it's very difficult it was certainly difficult for me to join all the dots together to actually come to a conclusion that this was all one thing rather than lots of very separate little things. So for example, I started with my blood pressure went very high and my period stopped. And this was sort of 3 or 4 years before I was formally diagnosed. They were both looked into. There was no cause found. I was just sort of told to get on with things. And you get on with things. I was tired all the time, but I was a mum of 2, busy house, busy job, obviously, as a GP. So you put it down to all of those things. And then I got blood clots on both my lungs in 2016. And then it was about 4 or 5 months later that I went just for my routine eye check, and they said, your eye pressures have gone up. And it was at that point that I just thought, this is ridiculous. There's something going on here. And the light bulb moment really for me was after the eye exam, I went home and I was looking at myself in the mirror and I looked at my legs and thought, my running's going really well. My legs are really slim. And then thought, wait a minute, my arms are really thin. Oh my God, my tummy is enormous. I look like the textbook picture. And that's when I really started to sort of question things. I went to my GP with the full set of what symptoms I had and said, do you think this could be Cushing's? And her immediate response was, no, you can't have Cushing's, it's rare. And I had to push to say, well, could you still just test me?
OK, let's bring in Mark now. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. Talk to us about why Cushing's disease is so hard to diagnose.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think Kate's actually probably caught the essence of this, which is that many of the features are non-specific. They're things that a lot of people might experience in their lives, in particular the physical features. And also the fact that actually it is a rare condition means that it's often not really at the top of the list of things that people are thinking about.
So, Mark, are there key things that health professionals should be looking out for?
I think there certainly are. To get to the diagnosis of Cushing's, you really have to be a good detective in so much as you need to take all those pieces of evidence that are starting to fall onto the table, as it were, and piece them together. So if you, for example, see a young lady where there is a weight issue, she's developed high blood pressure, she's developed diabetes, perhaps she's now got acne or hair growth in places which are unwelcome from a lady's perspective. If there's bruising, if the skin is a little thinner, looks like that perhaps of somebody who's older, then you should be stopping and saying, hang on, this is very unusual.
I mean, Kate said, she was diagnosed in 2017. What's the implications for someone who's undiagnosed and untreated?
Well, they're pretty significant, as you've really already heard from Kate. She'd already got problems in terms of blood pressure, which almost certainly would have not gone away. That blood pressure probably would have become more difficult to control. And we know that actually, when we didn't have so good treatments for Cushing's, people who had had symptoms dating back 4 or 5 years, about nearly half of those patients historically probably would not have survived. Now, in modern medicine, that's not the case. We've got much more effective treatments. We can treat with tablets, for example, which can lower the cortisol levels, and that can produce quite quick and effective change in the patient. And then we have the option, hopefully, of a pituitary operation, which is to remove the small tumour that's causing the Cushing's. These tend to be benign tumours, by the way, but these are readily dealt with by an expert centre.
Kate, how easy was your treatment?
I ended up having pituitary surgery in October 2017, which in itself wasn't overly traumatic, but then the recovery from that was prolonged.
And how are you feeling now?
Fine, good, thank you.
So every day, you feeling good every day? Or?
Yeah, I have to take replacement steroids. So because my pituitary gland doesn't produce the right hormones anymore, I'm probably going to be on those for life. So that's taking tablets at a specified time every day, 4 times a day.
Well, Dr. Kate Scoffins and Professor Mark Gunnell, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Working with rare disease patient communities can offer pharmaceutical companies an insight into the challenges of those living with rare disease. It is through these collaborations that Kyowa Kirin is able to better understand the reality of those living with different rare diseases and ultimately advocate for positive change.
For some diseases, it can take between 5 and 30 years to get an accurate diagnosis. It can be frustrating, demoralising, isolating, and really impact on someone's quality of life. 40% of people with some rare diseases receive the wrong diagnosis. Kyowa Kirin works with the rare disease community to support an earlier and more accurate diagnosis. Kyowa Kirin is a Japanese pharmaceutical company contributing to well-being through innovative drug discoveries. It specialises in oncology, nephrology, the central nervous system and immunology. At its core, putting the patient at the heart of every decision.
Probably one of the biggest challenges is getting the right diagnosis. Because it's a rare disease, many doctors may not be familiar with how to diagnose this specific disease when the patient shows up. So this then translates to patients maybe going, doctor to doctor for many months, sometimes many years before they get the correct diagnosis. So as a company, what we're trying to do is raise the level of awareness and education for both patients and doctors to try and shorten that diagnostic journey to make it as quick as possible.
Some areas the company focuses on are X-linked hypophosphatemia, XLH, a rare genetic disease affecting bones, teeth, muscles and joints, and cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, CTCL, a potentially life-threatening cancer of the white blood cells.
We need to appreciate the difficulty in living with these diseases for patients, carers, as well as family members. From diagnosis to quality of life, and we need to do whatever we can in partnership with patients, carers, groups to understand how we can make life better for them. Earlier diagnosis and better treatment.
The challenges are enormous, from reaching a correct diagnosis to finding the right support and treatment options. Eurodis is a not-for-profit alliance of patient organisations, creating a community to advocate for rare disease patients.
It's critical for the 30 million persons living with rare disease in Europe. With this European plan, by 2030, we want to reduce the time to diagnose from 4 years to 6 months. We want to improve the survival by 3 years on the average for all people living with rare diseases. We want to reduce by 1/3 the deaths of children of less than 5 years. This is the European plan. We need a strategy across all EU programs and to integrate national level with European level.
For this pharmaceutical company, it's about making the right decisions for the right reasons, fulfilling their role and responsibility as a member of the pharmaceutical industry in working hard towards an earlier diagnosis for all rare diseases and ensuring that the voice of the patient is always heard.
Patients understand best what is important for them, and we need to listen to them. We need to ask them what they think are the gaps and see what we can do to actually generate the evidence and give the information that is critical for their well-being.
Our company purpose is really simple. It's to make people smile. That applies nowhere better than with the patients we serve, whether it's helping them get a better diagnosis quicker, whether it's enabling them to access our medicines. Ultimately, it's about improved outcomes which make patients smile, and that's in line with our philosophy.
Kiowa Kirin, a commitment to life, innovation, integrity and teamwork to raise awareness of rare diseases, improve diagnosis and bring innovative medicines to those who need them most.
Mitochondrial disease is a genetic disorder linked with many conditions, including epilepsy, diabetes and cancer. The Wellcome Centre for Mitochondrial Research at Newcastle University is a multidisciplinary team committed to finding a cure to transform the lives of those with mitochondrial disease and associated conditions.
I do get really bad fatigue and I tend to spend most time in bed, so then my mum and my dad get grumpy with us because I don't want to leave the house.
Never heard of mitochondrial disease until the doctor sat in the room and gave us a diagnosis. The first thing we did was Google mitochondrial disease, and that was quite devastating. There is only one outcome at the moment, which will be a debilitating condition that she has to live with for the rest of her life.
Emily and her mum Val have had more than their fair share of hospital visits, but today they'll be meeting the scientists in Newcastle trying to tackle this degenerative condition for which there is currently no cure. Almost all the cells in our body contain mitochondria. They help provide the energy that allows them to do their job properly. Now, depending on which cells become dysfunctional will determine the symptoms and in which organ. Every patient is different and it can develop at any age, and that is what makes it so difficult to spot.
It can be from deafness, diabetes, not able to keep up with your peers, exercise, sometimes even mimicking things like anorexia, right through to severe epilepsy and dementia in very young people. It's quite often goes unrecognised and undiagnosed. We have a real passion and drive, work closely with our patients. They really give us all the best ideas around our science, and we're pushing for a cure. Without research, there'll never be a cure. But also we're trying to improve the quality of lives of patients at the same time.
Emily is getting a behind-the-scenes look at the laboratory, and she's poking her nose into everything.
I have a question. What's in these fridges?
I can open one if you want to have a look. So we have chemicals and we'll probably have samples in there. So DNA.
Emily would love to reduce her medication, and she's not shy in chivvying the medical team to keep on their toes.
Honestly, sometimes I really feel like I need to do their job for them so I can get my results and start getting on a better path with my health and my walking and...
The frustration is understandable after the way the disease suddenly changed her life and that of her parents.
On the Monday, we kept her home from school, having felt just generally unwell. On the Tuesday morning, we woke up and she was having a massive seizure, and within an hour she was put in intensive care. She's gone from being a very independent young girl at 15-year-old to a very dependent young lady. We need to help take her to the toilet. We feed her, we dress her, we bathe her. It affects all the family. We have to rely on carers to come in for Dad and I to get some time out because it's 24/7.
So my research involves trying to find new treatments for mitochondrial dysfunction. One of the things that really kind of spurred me on was actually seeing just how bad mitochondrial diseases are, which is something I think with other areas of research and other centres you don't really get that interaction with patients, and it really focuses the mind on trying to develop the treatments.
Newcastle is the largest of 3 specialist centres in the UK. They estimate 1 in 200 babies could be born with the genetic condition, and many may be undiagnosed. As well as making the case for more funding, the unit wants to spread the word about the condition.
We need all healthcare professionals, when you come into that first point of access, be it a GP, an emergency unit, someone just think, could this be mitochondrial disease? If you see 2 organs involved, think about it. Or if you think something just doesn't fit, think mitochondrial disease.
We're quite delighted to be in the mitochondrial research unit here today. You don't realise what goes on behind the scenes and in terms of the research that is actually being done.
It's actually really interesting, and it's put my mind at ease because sometimes I'm just like, have I even done anything about this?
I'm really impressed. It really has given me some hope for her future just visiting here today.
Most people in the UK affected by rare diseases face multiple challenges, from getting an accurate diagnosis to accessing treatment. Sanofi, one of the world's largest healthcare companies, is working hard to change that.
As Dominic's mother and head of market access for the UK and Ireland at Sanofi, Fleur Chandler represents families struggling to live with rare diseases.
My whole career has been around ensuring that patients in the UK can get access to medicines by trying to demonstrate the value of those medicines. And while working at Sanofi, I can really continue to do that and also bring my personal experience now into my professional life.
Dominic is 15 and living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a disabling genetic condition. His muscles, including his heart, get progressively weaker, and he's been in a wheelchair since he was 10. The disease is terminal.
The word fatal is very difficult to comprehend, and in something like Duchenne it's so slow that you know that it's coming, and I know that I will outlive my son. And that's very difficult because I think that puts you into a sort of low level of depression in a constant way.
Families such as Fleur's have the additional burden of knowing that most research tends to centre on diseases that affect large numbers of people. However, Sanofi have a history of work on rare diseases stretching back more than 30 years.
As a result of the work being carried out by companies like Sanofi and better management of the complications that can arise from rare diseases, life expectancy is increasing, and young adults have a family and careers, with some surviving into their 30s and even their 40s.
Shortening the time frame from the first sign of symptoms to diagnosis and then treatment can make a huge difference.
We believe that there are 3 areas that we need to partner in and collaborate in. The first is the use of big data. to find the undiagnosed patients. The second is around diagnostic testing and the infrastructure that's set up for that. And then the third is around rapid and sustainable access to therapies.
The issue with rare diseases, obviously there's so many rare diseases, and individually they're very, very rare, but collectively it's actually quite common to have a rare disease.
Dr. James Lineker believes more specialised research is needed to help patients with rare diseases.
I think we have to focus more on each individual rare disease. I think we have to focus on screening for these diseases. And once we've found treatments that work, it's a case of getting them to the people that need them as soon as possible. And that will really transform the outlook for the lives of patients with these rare conditions.
Harnessing technology is also key to making patients' lives easier and giving them a degree of control.
And I think one thing that technology can do is allow our patients to find each other online and form groups. And most importantly, I think, for many rare diseases where there aren't many treatments, is finding out what research is going on and how they can take part in that.
Lower numbers of patients means less funding, which can make developing treatments difficult. But Sanofi is dedicated to supporting this work.
We continue to work diligently in the R&D teams, both in terms of improvements in the disease areas we work in today, but also on areas where there aren't yet therapies.
But Fleur knows there may never be a medicine to help her son.
The downside of working in the healthcare industry and pharma is that I know that he's past the age where even if any medical miracle happens, it's not going to apply to us. But there is a life to be lived, and it is one that's very much worth living.
Thank you for watching Shining a Light on Rare Conditions. We hope you enjoyed the programme. From me and the team here at ITN Productions, thank you for watching. Goodbye.